Beautiful. All right, this is it. We're live. We should be live. How are you,
Yes, I'm
Andrea?
so good. Thank you for having me.
This is a special episode because it's the first time I'm doing a live episode of the Hardcore Soft Skills podcast. So I'm super excited, and I'm very excited to be doing this with you. For those of you listening in, this is Andrea Goulet. She is the founder of Empathy in Tech, and she has been talking about empathy in tech for over 2 decades. Particularly a lot of very interesting conversations as well that she has on her podcast with Reminders and wonderful guests as well. So I would like to delve a lot in the topic of empathy, all the areas, particularly that you mentioned that empathy is a very technical skill. So tell us a little bit more about you, Andrea.
Yeah. So empathy is a technical skill. I didn't think that.
Yeah.
I started out feeling like I was almost a traditional empath, where I kind of had this idea that empathy was a little bit more like a psychic ability, where you walk into a room and you can kind of get this, oh, I know what people are thinking. And I was pretty good about it, kind of assessing, the general feeling in a room. Um, I worked in sales. I worked in, strategic communications, which is my favorite. So that is helping organizations really mobilize um, the people who are contributing so that they feel like they have a shared narrative and they have the right kind of infrastructure to really move forward and communicate well. I absolutely geek out about that stuff. And so in 2009, a friend of mine from high school came up to me. His name is Scott, and said, the way you think, because I had a blog and stuff like that. He's like, the way you think about communications, you're a programmer. I was like, no, I'm not. Like, I use software, but like, I've never coded. And at the time, it was very stereotyped. There was this idea of, kind of the nerdy person with glasses and, spent all the time in the computer lab and didn't, ever talk to people. And I was falling into that trope where I was like, I don't think I look like that or identify with that. So I can't be a programmer. And he was like, no. Like you're thinking about things in terms of inputs and algorithms and outputs. And that's exactly what we do as programmers. So, he asked me, he said that he had been looking for a CEO of his software startup and was convinced that I was the right person. So after a few months of kind of exploring it, we took on some kind of small projects to see how we worked together. And yeah, so I became the CEO of a software company, and we specialized in modernizing software. So taking existing software applications that needed a little love, like weren't
Yeah.
as performant, like needed some more security. They needed like their frameworks updated, things like that. And really enjoyed it. But what was fascinating was that my one condition was that if we were going to build this company, empathy had to be at the center of everything. It had to be the DNA of this organization. And the reason was because I had been trained a lot in terms of perspective taking and understanding how people feel. Like I got a more technical understanding of empathy because of my communications background. I was like, this is the key to everything. If we can't empathize with people, we won't be able to know what's important. We won't be able to prioritize. We won't be able to take care of our customers. We won't be able to take care of our staff. I just saw how critical it was for any organization. And I didn't think software was any different.
Mm-hmm.
But then when we went to different consultants to kind of help us with our messaging and things like that, our 5-year vision, it was really interesting because we got laughed at. Like
Oh.
literally in our faces. And one person even said, you can't use the word empathy and software in the same sentence because you will be laughed out of the industry.
Huh. I was going to
And
ask
I was
about the
like,
reaction to that. Yeah.
yeah.
Wow.
And I was like, what? Like, it was just such a strong trope.
Mm-hmm.
where I believe that it's the flip side of girls can't code, right? Where it's like
Hmm.
you have to look this certain way, like an empath feels this certain way. So, over the course of, 15 years, we built a business and empathy was at the very center and it worked. And we were able to make progress where other folks couldn't. And in the process of all of that, I've just been really interested in the research behind what is empathy. And like I started writing, a little bit about it, like what is empathy? And I did not realize it was going to take me like 4.5 years to answer that question because
Yeah,
it's so complex. And
yeah,
that I think was the first signal to me that empathy is a technical skill because there is so much depth to it. There is so much nuance to it. And that's the same with anything that's technical. And, being able to know when you leverage different aspects of it, I think that's crazy important and really interesting. And so
yeah,
founded Empathy in Tech as a way to help bring that narrative to a industry that has so sorely, and it's the same with you, right? Like with the hardcore soft, it's like, oh, empathy, it's just a soft skill we don't need.
hmm,
No, it's
hmm,
essential, right?
hmm,
It's very
yeah,
essential. And especially in software, it helps us with code maintainability. Like if you're thinking about how you name your variables, if you think about how you're doing a code review, like, all of these different things, how you're doing the architecture, even like there's
yeah.
so much there that requires you to consider other people's points of view.
Hmm.
But then we think empathy is this like, it's not that important. So
Yeah, that's right. I love that you say that because it's particularly the reactions from the folks because it's interesting that perhaps we don't mention it right now. It may have been. I've seen it becomes more popular right now that hey, the skills for the future. We need empathetic organizations, in business, etc. Some of the best developers I've worked with are actually pretty empathetic or have that build that skill, and they may not say it out loud. Oh, I'm very empathetic, but so how can we integrate it in the organizations without doing the thing, without talking about the thing, So
yeah.
what are some effective ways that you've discovered on that journey?
Yeah. So I think the first thing is to really define the parameters of what is empathy, because then we know what we're working with and we know what to apply.
Mm,
My favorite, like the definition that I've been most impacted with and that I really like is by a professor named Jean City at the University of Chicago. And and he's been focusing on the neuroscience of empathy. Like how do we experience it in our bodies, right? Like, how does the brain work, right? So he says there's four different areas within our bodies that through the interactions of these different systems, empathy then arises. So we can't pin it to like one specific gene. It's more complex than that. So the first one, which really kind of took me by surprise, but then I was like, oh, that makes a ton of sense, is regulation. We have to be able to take some deep breaths. And if we're activated, calm ourselves down. So it's about being very intentional in choosing how we want to, like, whether or not our body is activated or calm, and being able to do the things so that we are in a position where we can listen, where we can empathize. Because if we're so stressed out,
mhm,
like we can't have those conversations where we're understanding someone else because we're so defensive and we're focused on ourselves. And so when I read that, I was like, oh, I've never heard that in the context of empathy. But once I did, I was like, that makes so much sense. The next one is affect, which is emotion sharing. Um, this is the one that kind of most people associate with empathy. And it's, oh, I noticed that it so there's what's called the circumplex model of emotions, not to get too nuanced, right?
mm,
But I think this makes it so, and this is what the affect is focused on. So there's two axes, activated and calm, and then
yeah,
the other one is positive and negative.
mhm,
So it's being able to kind of plot on there, like you don't have to name it. Naming is a completely different part of the brain, right? But it's being able to kind of align and go, okay, Yadi, I can sense right now that you're feeling kind of neutral and maybe slightly positive, but not overly active, right? Whereas somebody else, it's like, whoa, you are way activated and something is really off and something's negative, right? That kind of being able to plot it there and then have a pang of that remembrance of, I know what it's like to feel that. So that's what affect means. Next is cognitive empathy, which is using our brains and our rational reason and analytical thinking to think through things more logically. So this is perspective taking. This is talking to people. This is recognizing that different people have different points of view than you do. How do you reconcile some of these things? What are the contributing factors that might help you understand why somebody feels that way? So understanding people's beliefs, their values, their backgrounds, their experiences, those kinds of things. And then the last one is motivation, which is also compassion, which is then, okay, I see that you're suffering. What can I do to help? And it's feeling that compulsion to aid in somebody else's well-being or your own well-being. So those are kind of the four aspects. And when those four things are in balance, that's when we have empathy.
Mm. That's fascinating. That's wonderful in terms of, as you describe, the depth uh, of of empathy in how it just, starting with our own regulation, as you mentioned. And then I'm curious on the part of the, as individuals in an organization, and when you mentioned earlier about trying to have empathy as the forefront of, the company itself, how do you do that? Is it educating people about, how to just cultivate a particular either mindset, or is it about how do we create it in a culture, or is it in the set of practices? How that could you walk us through that process of integrating and making it the forefront of the organization?
Yeah. So you need to do two things.
Hmm. Okay.
You need to focus on skills and systems. So
Okay.
there is a individual skill building. So self-awareness, like being able to emotionally regulate, uh, being able to recognize okay, how do we create a customer journey? Somebody talked about, remembering that there is a human being behind, all of these different challenges, which this is why I think empathy and technology and other professions, it tends to get kind of like, oh, that's not a big deal. But there are many roles where you're kind of abstracted. Like developers tend not to interact with the people who are going to be using the software that they are using as much as a customer service person.
Mm-hmm.
And so it takes a little bit of extra effort to remember that, right? So I'm like you, Yadi. I have met immensely compassionate people in this industry. And there is a little bit of extra okay, I got to remember this. I think lawyers and, some other professions too, if you're working in accounting or billing, you're just kind of abstracted away. So remembering that. The skill building, and empathy is a skill. This is something you can learn how to regulate. You can
Mm-hmm.
learn, how to have affect. And different people, just like anything that has to do with the human condition, different
Mm-hmm.
people are better at this than others, just off, out of the gate. But at the same time, we can learn these different skills. The other one is systems.
Yeah.
And one of my favorite quotes is by W. Edward Deming, which is, a bad system will beat a good person every time.
Mm-hmm.
So if you are in an organization where it's very hard to be empathetic because the tolerance for it is low, or you're being overworked all the time,
Yeah.
or, it's like you don't even have space to have these, you're triple booked for meetings. There are functional things within the organization that need to happen in order for that to exist. So that's where some of the strategic communications and the operations and, people who are focusing more on the systems need to know, okay, how do I create operational systems that then will enable empathy to happen?
Yeah.
And this isn't just about letting people walk all over you or everybody has a say in every single decision, because then you can't get anything done. It's really about how do we create those shared values? How do we create some unity around our mission and what we're trying to achieve? And then, how do we create the systems that will support us?
Yeah, that's so true in terms of, because there could be the intentions of the people who want to do the thing, but make it's the systems that are the key, as you say. I love that quote that you mentioned, and the fact that these are skills that we can learn. And when it
Yeah.
comes, yeah,
So I'll give a concrete example real quick. So, like the three places where I feel like organizations can really pay attention to are bureaucracy, burnout, and bottlenecks.
mm,
So, in terms of bureaucracy, that's how much structure we have within an organization. So, how much individual autonomy does someone have? When things are so bureaucratic that you can't get anything done, that's not good. You feel like a cog in the machine, right? Your ideas can't grow. But at the same time, if there's no structure, like, attending meetings where there's no agenda and then you leave and you're like, what did we even talk about? Right? Like, you know, there is a place for structure. So striking that right balance, empathy can really help with that. Burnout. So this is an example where a lot of companies try to do the right thing.
yeah,
And in order to, provide a sense of empathy, they do things like wellness programs where, it helps with weight management and, health and smoking cessation. That is helpful, and it does help with those specific things, but it doesn't address burnout, which is the stress of being at work is so immense that you can't contribute. You're either not motivated or you're just exhausted. So the biggest things there are, I feel like my manager doesn't understand me. I feel like I'm being worked to the point where I have no flexibility. I feel like I don't understand my role in the organization. And, so when you think about these things, they're really more like that have to do with relationships. And there's some good research by Gartner that's focused on, burnout within organizations. So fixing the things that are actually going to fix burnout,
hmm
instead of having the ones where it's like, they're not as effective. And then when it comes to bottlenecks, these are processes that slow us down. And, typically when we think of this, we think of lack of resources. I sometimes think of the Lucy skit, the comedy skit where she's like having chocolates and at the
oh yeah,
first time, when it comes by, it's like, oh, I can do this. And then like it speeds up and she's like, I'm stuffing it down her shirt. And like, that's a bottleneck, right? And then what's
yeah,
funny is then her manager comes in and is like, y'all are doing a great job. Speed it up. And the reason that is funny is because everybody knows it's not Lucy's fault.
hmm
Everybody can see she's trying as hard as she freaking can, but the system is working her against her. So where are those places? And I think one bottleneck that tends to get overlooked is why don't we cooperate with each other?
hmm
So where is the resentment? Where is the contempt? Where is the hurt? And if that goes unresolved, and that's stuff that's not going to show up in an employee engagement survey, right? So
yeah,
that's where it kind of gets deeper. And this is where the skill building comes in, because if people are able to resolve those interpersonal conflicts themselves, then we remove some bottlenecks. So I hope that's a little bit more concrete in terms of both skills and systems and how they kind of interact with each other.
absolutely, yes. And when it comes to skills, because sometimes the nature of skills is that sometimes we may think we're better at something than we actually are. So
Oh, yeah.
how let's say we have managers who think they're great, they're empathetic leaders, but how do we know, like, am I being an empath, or am I not being good enough? Like, what are some misconceptions around that?
Yeah, I think one of the misconceptions is that, well, I think there's two. First is people like me who are like, oh, I'm empathetic, but you're really not empathetic. You're operating out of hubris. Because if you walk into a room and you just assume that you know how everybody feels, that's literally the definition of hubris. So
Mm-hmm.
recognize, and so swapping that out for humility and saying, okay, here's my first instinct, but is that true? So an example here is, this happened when I was co-located in places, is that when I'm focused, I'm like, and people will walk by and they're like, oh my God, are you okay? Like, yeah, I'm kind
Yeah.
of working on this thing, because
Mhm.
they could tell, like they had that sense of like something's negative and they
Mhm.
wanted to help, right? And then I had to communicate, I'm like, I'm fine. This is just my focus face, right? And
Yeah.
so some people would then every time still, I'm like, I'm still fine, right? Other people were like, oh, okay, now I know. Um, so this is the ability to communicate with each other in a direct way. So, recognizing, oh, they're trying to help. They're trying to recognize that, my facial expression might indicate that I'm in pain. Maybe sometimes if I'm focusing too hard, I was. But, on the grand scheme of things, me also being able to identify, no, here is how I feel and here is how I'm expressing it. And the more direct we can be in our communication, the easier this is. And when we think of communication, then we think about, how do I get an idea from point A, from brain A to brain B as efficiently as possible without any of the information degrading? And we have to think about, there's 4 different considerations that we have to consider. The first is physical signals. So if somebody has noise canceling headphones on and you're trying to get their attention by yelling at them from behind, they're simply not going to hear you, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So paying attention to that. Next is language. So are we even able to parse each other's language? The example I give here is that I was in the Netherlands speaking at a conference this past summer, and I don't speak Dutch. And somebody came on the train and started speaking, and I couldn't understand
Mhm.
when the sounds of one word, like I couldn't even parse the
Mhm.
information. But then this person took a deep breath and was like, oh, where, can you show me your ticket? And I was like, oh, thank you. Yes, I can. Here you
Mhm.
go. So so we were literally speaking the same language at that point. Next is meaning, which is, okay, do I understand the words, but do I understand the concept that you're trying to convey? So this happened with Scott and I. He kept saying, we need to fail fast. And I'm like, from a business point, I'm like, no, we don't want to fail. We want to pay our bills and like be able to eat. We don't want to go into like
Yeah.
poverty by running this business. But it took us like 5 years to recognize that he was thinking about it in a short term and I was thinking about it in the long term. So
Mm.
we then changed it and we said, we need to get a rapid result. And then that way we're conceptually aligned. And then finally, we have relationships. So what is the trust? What is the shared history? What is the background? So when we are communicating, we're kind of thinking about all of those things, in order to convey information between each other. Um,
Yeah.
so,
Yeah. So importance of, um, as you mentioned, that transparency, clear communication. It's key. Another skill, I guess, you kind of part of that, have to build around in order to achieve empathy.
mm-hmm,
And when it comes to the, you mentioned at the beginning as well that the that part of the intent to make it a empathetic organization, um, is from a human aspect. Yeah, like we need to be, human with each other. But let's say from the business side of things, you
mm-hmm,
mentioned about great results that were
mm-hmm.
achieved through that. What are some of those specific results that you would see in people that put empathy in the forefront of a team or organization?
Yeah. So let's ground ourselves first, again, a little bit in why humans have empathy, right?
Hmm.
So humans are very unique in the way that we communicate. We pass down knowledge and we create kind of a shared understanding, right? Shared cognition is sometimes how anthropologists and evolutionary biologists describe this. Why do we do that? Why is so much of our brain about planning, language, being able to do this shared cognition? It's so that we can mobilize ourselves because we are a social species. So we can mobilize ourselves to adapt and change our environment, right? And that ensures species survival, right? At its basic level. And empathy is a huge piece of how we do that. Because when I can make a inference for how you're feeling and then communicate, like, is this how you're feeling, or is this what I think you are thinking we should do, right? Then we're able to do that faster. So really what empathy does, and this kind of evolutionary trait that humans have, what it does is enables us to solve problems by working together. This is why I call empathy our collective superpower. It's no one person's superpower. And when it comes to the business, most of the metrics that we use about how an effective business runs have to do with how well are we solving problems. So innovation, are we finding new solutions to problems? Productivity, are we using our resources effectively when we're solving problems? Efficiency, are we able to solve the same problems over and over again consistently and quickly? So when you start to put it into the context of problem solving, it's not just in a business, it's really in any organization. That can be a civic group or a community of faith or a family even. Like, what are the problems that we're trying to solve? And then how can we collaborate and work together so that we can solve them efficiently and quickly and productively?
Yeah, so it's like the key skill to that enables us to solve problems effectively. I love
Yeah.
that. And we were talking earlier before this live conversation about the need for empathy now more than ever. There's like changes around us. I've seen, if I look at my LinkedIn feed, I see a lot of people that are looking for job opportunities or
Yeah.
having to change from the environment, like remote to work to on-site work. Like, how can how can we prepare for that? Either giving support to colleagues, former colleagues, or
Yeah.
our whole network. What are some key things that you would recommend for that?
Yeah. So when I think about like empathy and how we do it effectively, there's a big piece of this which is about capacity. Empathy is work, and sometimes it is very hard work. Like, it takes effort to consider somebody else's point of view. And we can't do that all the time, right?
Mhm.
We do have to restore and replenish. So that's why I call it kind of the restore and explore model, where I think this is what I'm seeing is that people are starting to move towards deeper relationships and like smaller, more intimate communities. And I think that that is because people need to replenish, and social support is a big way we do that,
Yeah.
because it can be exhausting, like posting all the time and having all this, stuff, especially when there's disagreements. So, filling your own bucket to the best of your ability, taking calming deep breaths. There's things like a loving kindness meditation, which is really focused on cultivating the skill of compassion and saying, I know I do not agree with your behavior in any sense. Like, that is not okay. I also recognize you are a human being and you are suffering. And I truly wish you a life of peace and ease, because I recognize that's probably going to help take care of the behavior. So yourself being able to do that, oh, it's hard. It's really hard. But the research shows that's one of the best ways to build our capacity. Also, physical health, good sleep, things like that.
Yeah.
When we are in capacity, then it's like, okay, let me reach out to my network and figure out who can help me change. I mean, it's the same thing. It's a problem. Whether it's getting a new job or trying to figure out how you exist in the one that you're in because the culture has shifted so rapidly, or trying to uh, notice a big problem in the world, like, I don't know, climate change, and then saying, okay, how can I do something to contribute? And I think, like, we can get so focused on the big that then we feel powerless about the small. And empathy is a way to help us find that motivation. So I'll give you, I know we're wrapping up, but I want to give you a quick concrete thing.
Yes, please.
I had somebody on LinkedIn just ping me and say, "You're an awesome person." And I was like, my first instinct was like, what the heck? Like, why did you send this? Do you want something from me? Like, it was that. And then when I asked, he was just like, no, I just think the world needs more hope and kindness. So I figured it
Absolutely.
started with me, and I just, people that I admire and like, I just wanted to let them know. And I was like, oh my gosh. So then I did that to a lot of people in my network. Same thing. It was like, what did I do to deserve this? And so we forget the power of the individual conversations. And I think we need that now more than ever so that we can solve those big problems, and, not forgetting just how important social support is, which means empathy is important.
Well, that's wonderful. Thank you, Andrea. And I do think you are an awesome person as well
Oh,
because of
I
the the work that you do in terms of spreading the importance of empathy and just the human skills that we need in for yeah, better results, but just to be and exist in the workplace. So thank you so much. What's the best way for people to contact you or know more about your work?
Yeah, so I'm on LinkedIn. And then also you can go to Empathy in Tech. We just partnered with a fiscal sponsor, Super Blooms. So now we can take donations and sponsorships for our podcast, which is really exciting, and get people to help spread the word. We're going to be doing more content and training, which is really exciting, and just bring these skills kind of more to the forefront. So those are kind of the best ways right now.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Andrea. And thank you for those of you looking at, at this content live on LinkedIn. So we appreciate your feedback and comments as well. I see some comments here already. So thank you so much.
All right. Thanks, everyone.
Okay, bye bye.